Andrew, great to see you, my friend. How are you this week?
I'm doing great, Chris. Good to see you too. Looks like you got a fresh haircut.
I got a fresh cut just yesterday. Yeah, kind of funny. I'm on a regimen. I usually get a haircut every 3 weeks. But I'm doing some traveling Labor Day weekend, for opening football weekend, which you'll appreciate,
Yeah,
being in athletics. And my timing was thrown off a little bit. Had to time up the haircut so that I didn't do it too soon or too late. But yet yesterday was the day.
that's great. Well, I don't know if is this a video podcast or just audio, but I've got the old Chrome Dome, so it's just a razor for me
Yeah,
in the
fresh,
shower.
fresh cut
Yeah,
as well then. But no, Andrew, man, I'm excited to have you on the Books4Guys podcast. You and I got to meet a couple weeks ago, and we share a lot of the same passions: sports, reading. You do a lot more writing than me, which I'm interested in to talk about more of. But man, you've done a lot of things. So you're a New York Times best-selling author. You work with the athletics program there at Vanderbilt University. The books you've written are sports focused on some pretty cool stories that I think a lot of people find interesting. And then just recently started transitioning some of those stories into kids' books with athletes that are pretty well known as well. Um, but man, just to kind of kick things off for people who aren't familiar with your books and just your background, give us a little insight to your personal story and just kind of where your passion for writing came from.
first of all, thank you for having me on, and I love what you're doing, encouraging men and kids, boys to read. It's so important. And for me, sports and reading and writing have always been connected. I remember when I was 5 years old, my grandfather sent me my first set of baseball cards. And my parents said that that's basically how I learned how to read, was like reading the back of baseball cards. My same grandfather was back in Wisconsin, which is where I was from, but we had moved to the East Coast when I was in kindergarten. So he wanted to make sure that I was properly brainwashed to remain a Green Bay Packers fan and was a Milwaukee Brewers fan. And so in the mail every week, I would get, in addition to Sports Illustrated, a Packer report, a Packer newsletter, and What's Brewing, a Milwaukee Brewers newsletter. And, so for me, reading and sports were like the same thing, right? I was playing sports, but I was also reading about it. And then when I was in middle school, I tried to start my own sports magazine. And it was called AJ's Sports Journal. I wrote about the Brewers and the Packers and other, just the very beginnings of trying to write about sports. But I actually had a pretty cool interview in it also. My dad at the time worked at the Washington Post, and one of his colleagues was John Feinstein, who would go on to become one of the best, probably the best selling sports author of all time. At that point, he was just a young reporter at the newspaper, and I interviewed him. And so he's the first person I ever interviewed. And
Yeah.
looking back on it now as somebody that writes sports books, like to have that opportunity at age 13 to talk to him was pretty cool. 2 years later, our family moved to Austin, Texas, and played baseball at our high school, and I was sports editor of the school newspaper. And one day there was a poster on the wall at the school that was advertising a full tuition scholarship to Vanderbilt. And it was for high school sports writers, named after Grantland Rice, who's a famous early 1900s sports writer, and Fred
Yeah.
Russell, who was the sports editor of the Nashville Banner for over 50 years. And I applied for it and was very lucky and won the scholarship. It paid my way to college, full tuition, to Vanderbilt. And so I spent most of my college days working at the school paper, but I also wrote a paper for a Black history course on Perry Wallace, who had been the first Black basketball player in the SEC. And I'll wrap up this long answer in a minute, but that was
Yeah.
um, 17 years later. I came back to this paper that I had written in college, was still interested in Perry's story. And so the first book I ever wrote was a biography of Perry Wallace. Ended up adapting that adult book into a book for middle school kids. And then, as you mentioned, since then, I've been continuing to try to write books that are nonfiction, sports, history, some social issue that elevates it beyond just sports, and trying to get kids interested in reading um, through sports.
Yeah.
I think it can be a really accessible way to get young people into books, and adult men for that matter.
Yeah.
You see a basketball player, a baseball player, a football player on the cover. It to a certain group of people, that's like, okay, that's a book that I'm willing to dive into.
Yeah. No, I find this so fascinating because I think you and I were probably the same. We were nerds in a different sense of like sports. I remember being in elementary school and recording Monday Night Football because I had a bedtime, and so
Yeah,
Tuesday I'd hurry home so I could finish the second half of the game. And
that's
usually
awesome.
no one would tell me what the score is because no one was watching, or my teachers, they weren't up to date on that. But I was like, had to watch Monday Night Football, hated going to bed early, right? Couldn't finish. But similar to you, I remember asking my grandparents for Illustrated subscription because that's all I wanted to read was the sports articles about athletes. And that's really, I shared with you when we first met, what really got me interested in reading in general was reading sports biographies about athletes, before getting into other things. So I just think it's odd, like your path in childhood sound really similar to what I experienced as a kid too, and kind of where I'm at now. But um no, and I wanted to dive in a little bit uh to Perry's story, and just how did you learn about him? And obviously at Vanderbilt, that's where he came through, to kind of where that began. But how did you become familiar with him, and how did you get involved with writing his story?
Right. So when I was a sophomore, I was taking this Black history class, and Perry actually wasn't discussed much on campus at that time. That was the ironic thing, is he had been the Jackie Robinson, of the
Yeah.
SEC, and yet his story wasn't told broadly or even really on campus. And so he was finally invited back to campus that year, just a coincidence, while I happened to be there as a student. And it was almost 20 years after he had graduated. He'd never been invited back to be celebrated for this history that he had made. Um, but he was, by Sam Newton, who was the men's basketball coach at Vandy at that time, went on to become the athletic director at Kentucky, legendary basketball coach. And he remembered the history that Perry made because he had been the head coach at Alabama when Perry was at Vanderbilt. He invited him back to honor him, and there was an article in a student magazine about Perry Wallace. This is the first time I've ever heard of him. The article talks about Perry's first game at Mississippi State as a freshman and how he had this concern that he might get shot and killed on the basketball court in Starkville, Mississippi in 1967, right? So that really captured my attention as a was a history major, really interested in sports, taking a Black history class, and our assignment was coming up to write a paper about a civil rights figure that wasn't as well known as, like Martin Luther King or
Yeah.
Rosa Parks or somebody, right? And so I thought, well, Perry would be someone that I'd be interested in writing about.
Yeah.
And I was concerned that my professor would say, well, we don't write about basketball players in college. That's not a serious enough subject. And thankfully, that's not what she said. She said, if that's what you're interested in doing, that's what you should do. And so I found Perry. By this point, he was a law professor in Baltimore, and I just called him out of the blue, from my dorm, and spent 2 hours on the phone with him. Really just loved the experience of learning from him and writing that paper. And so it just never left my mind, for years. And finally, it was my father-in-law. I had declared that I wanted to write a book, but didn't know what I should like write about. And he said, like, what about Perry Wallace? Like you talk about him a lot and it's an interesting
Yeah.
story. And so, uh, that's how that came about. It goes back to just a paper I wrote for school.
Yeah. Man, that's incredible. And I'm glad you mentioned just like him never getting, or it took so long for his story to even be broadcasted or shared. It just shows, that at that time, a lot of athletes are getting that due respect now, for
Mhm.
what they did, what they had to endure, and then now certain athletes are able to do what they're able to do today because of them. And so Man, I just think that's awesome that you took that story and told him like, hey man, we're gonna write this about you and we're gonna share this and it's important. Like what you did was a huge deal.
Yeah, I
It,
mean, you think about the SEC with no black athletes, like
yeah,
Perry changed that. And um the other piece of this was that he had to be willing to tell his story, because there had been this frosty relationship between the university and him going back to his senior year when all he did was simply tell the truth about how hard it had been to be a pioneer, but a lot of people didn't want to hear that. But he was still uh even decades later, like someone could have said, "Oh, it's too late. Like, where were you when I needed you?" But he still felt like that telling his story would be educational, could be healing, transformational for the university, and it was rewarding to be a part of that whole process.
yeah. No, that's incredible. And then you ended up writing an anniversary portion of the book too, like 10 years later, right? After I
Yes,
believe he has passed, and you
correct.
wrote after that. Yeah, how what were there updates in the book, or were there things you learned from him after your first book that you incorporated in the second book?
So the original book came out in 2014. Then there was a 10th anniversary edition that just came out last year. And yeah, what I wanted to do is because when the book came out, it really created a lot of there were a lot of events related to it in Nashville where Perry came back. So he lived in Washington, D.C., where he was professor at American University. And when the book came out, there were a lot of his classmates from the 1960s that read it and said, I had no idea what Perry was going through. Like I regret that I had not tried to be a better friend or a better classmate and recognize what he was enduring, and yet I didn't. And so there are some really emotional scenes between Perry and some of his classmates and teammates that I wanted to reflect in the updated version of the book. This was a school that in a city that really had pushed him away back then, but then to see the warm embrace that he got and in regards to the book was something I wanted to tell. Like that was a continuation of the story. But then there was even a bit of a backlash also, where you had some schools that read the kids' version of the book as a school community and used it as a chance to talk about, well, what are some of the issues that some of our students are dealing with today that are similar to what Perry was dealing with, and how do we prevent this from happening? And there were some parents that didn't like the fact that those discussions were taking place. And so I thought it was important also, as we see so many times where there are gains in terms of racism or race relations, there's also a backlash. And it was illuminating to be able to write that in the 10th anniversary book.
Yeah. No, I love that. And again, I just these are things that have happened. Like that's the facts. These are stories that need to be told, and
Hmm.
we can learn so much from. But again, just the appreciation, as someone who has not experienced that or had to go through that, and continuing to learn, and personally fascinated as I'm here in Nashville now, and kind of learning some of the Black history of the city, and just again seeing your story about Perry Wallace and being the first Black African American athlete at Vanderbilt on the basketball team. Um, it just I just love to learn about that, and again, I need to know about that. I need to learn
Yeah.
about it as a person, and again, it just as you started this conversation off of tying these different things together, sports, the history, in your writing and putting that all together. I just think that's like just bravo to you for doing that. I think for telling a story and stepping up to the plate and doing that.
Thank you. Yeah. And one thing I wanted to do is for people who read the book, let's say they're coming at it from a sports background. I wanted to write with authority as a sports writer, and for someone to say, okay, this author, they know basketball. Like this rings true from a basketball perspective. But equally important to me was someone coming at it from maybe they're interested in civil rights history, or higher ed history or national history. Like I wanted it to ring true to those people also.
Yeah,
And so that required a lot of research. I spent 8 years working on the book, 4 years just of research before I wrote a single
yeah.
word. And that's something that I'm personally proud of with the book is it could be seen as a sports book or a civil rights book, equally.
Yeah. I was actually just about to ask how long it took you to put all of it together so that it resonated with like you said, the different people with different interests. Sounds like it took quite a
Yeah,
while and quite a bit of
took a
work.
long time. Yeah, and, during those 8 years, it wasn't like it was the only thing I was doing. I had a regular job, I got
Yeah,
married, we had our 2 kids during that period, so there was a lot happening, but pretty much any minute I wasn't at work or, with, my family, I was working on
yeah,
the book and sometimes taken away from my family, so I've
yeah,
I've learned that that can be a trap, and it's not necessarily easy to have this side career as an author, and you're trying to balance so many things in life, but
yeah,
when the book comes out, it's worth it.
yeah. Were you communicating with Perry that entire time?
I
And
was, and so that
yeah,
was actually an unexpected bonus, is that I got to know him better and better and better, and I could go
yeah,
back to him as opposed to like writing a paper for college. Maybe you talk to somebody one time, right? Like for writing the book, I was able to interview him dozens of times, or email him questions to clarify something. He came to Nashville, and my favorite day in researching the book was just driving around Nashville with him. And
uh,
he showed me like the houses he grew up in, and if he was describing a scene that took place at a park in 1966, like we went to the park and he showed me what
yeah,
happened there. And so that was really cool. I was trying to maintain a certain detachment from Perry though as I was working on the book. It wasn't like I was writing it on his behalf. I wanted to write
yeah,
the truth, whatever it was. And so you can't necessarily become too close to your subject while you're working on the book. But then after it came out, like I could kind of let that go. And so we became even better friends, I would say, after the book came out.
yeah. No, it's interesting you say that. I haven't thought of it that way to the point where if you got so close to Perry, you're almost writing like a piece defending him in every way
Right.
and almost making it like a just spinning it how it's not how you wanted it to be. Uh, so yeah, it's interesting. I didn't think of it that way to where you got to stand back at a 30,000 foot view and actually make sure everything is stated correctly on how it happened and not going one side or the other. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, interesting. No, it's interesting. Yeah, I'm not a writer, so I don't think of it that way. So that's good to know. Just the
Yeah. I mean,
process
and there's a
that you go
difference
through.
in biographies. Like you'll sometimes see on the cover, it'll say authorized biography.
Hmm.
And that means that the subject and the author like are in business together for this book.
Yeah,
It sounds like it might be better to read an authorized biography than an unauthorized biography, but really the opposite is true. Like an unauthorized biography means that, there's no financial arrangement between the writer and the subject. And so typically, in my experience, in my opinion, those are the more honest books. Authorized biography is essentially, it can be kind of a marketing or public relations tool for the subject.
yeah. And then you're probably certain things you can't say,
Yeah, they're like,
don't
I
want to
would rather you not
say.
talk about that, and
Yeah,
so
yeah, you don't go
the
maybe as
reader's not
deep
getting the whole
as what
story.
the real story is. So that's
Right.
interesting. I actually did not know that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people don't know that.
Right.
uh,
Right.
no, no, that's awesome. Your other book, well, two other books. The Games of Deception was another one that was interesting, talking about Nazi Germany, the U.S. men's basketball team going over to play.
Mhm.
Talk a little bit about that book and just how you got interested in writing about that story.
Yeah, yeah. So as you mentioned, Games of Deception is the story of the first U.S. men's Olympic basketball team. They played at the 1936 Olympics in Nazi Germany, and we read a lot about Jesse Owens or Boys in the Boat, another great book, Unbroken, another great book that deals with those Olympics. But I actually had a chance to speak at the University of Kansas about Strong Inside and the book on Perry Wallace. And while I was there, I really wanted to see Allen Fieldhouse where the Jayhawks play basketball.
Of
As a
course.
basketball fan, I wanted to see it, right?
Yeah.
And so they have a great basketball museum attached to Allen Fieldhouse. And while I was on the tour there, they showed a picture of James Naismith, the inventor of basketball, who later became the basketball coach at Kansas. And the funny thing is, he's the only basketball coach at Kansas history with a losing record. The inventor of basketball had a
Wow.
losing
Wow.
record at the sport he invented. But the picture of him was with a Japanese player from the 1930s. And I asked, like, what's the story of this picture? And the man showing me around said, well, did you know that Naismith was able to see his invention played in the Olympics. And I had never thought about that. I didn't realize that. And when I asked them which Olympics it was, and they said it was the Nazi Olympics, I figured, well, that would be like a really fascinating story to learn about. And just think about like the idea that you could invent a sport and within your own lifetime, like back then, right? He
Yeah.
invented it in the 1890s. It becomes so popular and played all around the world that it
Becomes an
could
Olympic
become an
sport.
Olympic sport while you're
Yeah.
still alive. Like without the internet or TV, like how did people learn about this game in other
Yeah.
countries and that he just invented at the YMCA training school in
Yeah.
Massachusetts? So I wanted to learn that story, and then um, no more like controversial, interesting Olympics to write about than those Berlin games. And so many basketball fans love the dream team, look forward to watching basketball in the Olympics,
Yeah.
but don't really know this is where it got started. And so
Yeah.
to learn that story, it was really fun to work on the research and the writing for that book.
Yeah. That's it, man. That's crazy. I didn't think about that either. How and just because basketball's such a global sport now,
Right.
all over the world. I mean, like American football is not played many other places, but basketball you can go pretty much to any country, and there's a basketball goal somewhere, or
Yeah.
and somebody's playing some sort of game of pickup, one on one. Um, that
The,
yeah, that's
those
incredible. And then
36
yeah, the
Olympics.
timing of it all.
Yeah. And those Olympics are what really helped jumpstart the game in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
Um, So the other medalists that year, we won the gold medal, were Canada and Mexico, which haven't medaled again in men's
Yeah.
basketball since then. Europe was really just starting to pick it up. You think about like the great uh, Russian teams that we would play in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Like a lot of their players came from Lithuania, which was part of USSR then. Now Lithuania has its own great basketball teams, but
Yeah.
there was a Lithuanian American player on the American team that stayed in Europe after the games, and he's considered kind of like the James Naismith of Lithuanian basketball. You think about like Arvydas Sabonis or Šarūnas Maršaliūnas, that were those great players. They learned from guys that this man Frank Lubin had taught in 1936. Another fun thing about the team that year, there was a player named Joe Fortenberry on the American team that's considered the first player ever to dunk, and
Oh,
he did it at a game at Madison Square Garden on this unusual shot that nobody had ever seen before. And the sports writer had to figure out a way, like, how do I describe this in my
yeah.
article? And said that it looked like um, a customer at the diner dunking their donut in coffee, and that's where the term dunk comes from. Uh, Half the players on the first American Olympic team worked at Universal Pictures in Hollywood. They had a company basketball team that was really good, and the way the team was formed in 36 was a March Madness style tournament, and the two
Yeah.
teams that made it to the finals, their best players were combined to become the Olympic team. And
Wow.
it was open to any amateur team in the country.
Yeah.
And this team at Universal was one of those two teams. And so you had stagehands, that were
Yeah.
playing in the Olympics.
That's so awesome. Yeah, seeing the evolution of basketball, and I obviously like me watching, old clips and whatnot, before the 3-point shot, but didn't even think about like the first dunk, how somebody would like, watching it and be like, well, does that count?
What was
Is
that?
that
Yeah,
real?
exactly.
Can he do that?
They
I can
also
just
played
imagine
the
the confusion.
Olympic tournament in 36 outside on clay tennis courts that were converted into basketball courts.
Yeah.
And Americans weren't too happy about that, but it worked out fine for the first couple of rounds. But the gold medal game was playing in a driving rainstorm, and they refused to move the game inside. And the German organizer said, "Well, we play soccer outside in the rain. Like you can play basketball outside in the rain." And the court was
Wow.
muddy. The ball was waterlogged. It was not like the most beautiful display of
Yeah.
basketball in the gold medal game.
What a story. You know? Like we would never see that now.
No,
Um, actually for us now, like there's been a couple college games on like some of the military battleships, like
right, like on a
outposted.
battleship or something. Yeah,
Yeah, and we think that's so cool, like playing outside game like never happens, but to have the gold medal game in a
gold medal game.
rainstorm, that's amazing. It just makes that's a sports story that's just like, yeah, that's just something that just doesn't happen. That's
No, I
crazy.
know. Imagine like the Twitter storm that would take
Yeah,
place
yeah. Could you
if
imagine
that
if
was
that was
happening
done
now.
now? Just what that would generate. That's incredible. Uh, so moving on to your other books, obviously the basketball ones, we've got those covered. But you wrote a baseball book too. Glenn Burke, Singled
Mhm.
Out. Tell me a little bit about that. How you decided to write that book?
Yeah. So I'm a huge baseball fan. I have a literary agent, Alex Shane, that knows I love baseball, and we were bouncing around like baseball ideas. And he said, there's never been a biography of Glenn Burke before. And going back to my baseball cards, I remembered having Glenn's Dodger card. I think it's a 77 tops set, where he's in one of those like very fake poses, like the old cards used to
Oh
have.
yeah,
And I knew that Glenn was considered the first openly gay Major League Baseball player, and that he also was credited with inventing the high five, which was bizarre to me that like you could invent the high five,
yeah,
So I looked into it a little bit more and discovered that I could tell. Like one thing I like to do in my books is place the person's story into a larger context of the times. So
hmm
Perry Wallace is playing basketball in the SEC during the height of the civil rights movement, so that made it an interesting story to tell. Glenn Burke is coming along during the height of the gay rights movement in the 1970s. There haven't hasn't been another gay baseball major league baseball player like come out like while
yeah,
they're playing. You
yeah,
have had that in the NFL and the
yep,
NBA. Um, and I personally think, like sports is for everybody, and if there is a gay kid out there that hasn't been able to see a role model and realize like, yeah, I can play baseball too, that would be an important story to tell. And so this book is aimed at like high school age audiences.
yeah,
Glenn was a fascinating person. Not only did he invent the high five with Dusty Baker, he was the first major league player to wear Nikes in a game. Now Nike is the official like
yep,
uniform sponsor of Major League Baseball, but nobody did it before Glenn. He played college basketball at Nevada at the same time that he was playing in the minor leagues. So it was a rare thing, and he was one of the first guys to do that. He was considered the best athlete at his high school in the Bay Area, which produced a lot of professional basketball and baseball players, but Glenn was the best. And he
yeah,
kind of like destroyed a lot of stereotypes that people at the time had about like what a gay man was capable of doing. He died of AIDS, so I'm able to tell that side of the story also. It was and those Dodger teams were great teams.
yeah,
This is the 1970s teams with Steve Garvey and Dusty Baker, Reggie Smith, Ron Say, um, Don Sutton,
yeah,
and so the reason he invented the high five was because they were entering the last month of the season. The Dodgers were on the verge of setting a major league record to have four players on one team hit 30 or more homers. Three players had already done it. Dusty Baker had 29.
yeah,
And like these weeks go by where he doesn't hit another home run in September. Finally, the last homestand of the season, they're playing the Astros. J.R. Richard is pitching the last game of the season, who was, one of the toughest pitchers to hit in MLB at that time. And Dusty's pretty much resigned to the fact he's going to let his teammates down. They're not going to set the record. But his third at bat of the game, he hits a homer. And Glenn Burke is on deck, and he's just like lifted by the crowd cheering and raises his arm, and they slap hands. And the Dodgers got a picture of it. They coined the term high five,
high
use that in
five.
their marketing the next year. And it really just symbolized the type of guy that Glenn was. He was a great teammate. There's often like discussions now, like, oh, a gay player would be a distraction on a team. Glenn wasn't a distraction on that team. They said they needed a guy like him. He was funny. He kept the team loose. He loved to listen to music. Um, and he was very supportive of his teammates. So the fact that he would invent a gesture that's like in support of another person's
Yeah,
achievement, like really was the type of guy that Glenn was. So
yeah,
I loved writing that book. And then I have another basketball book called Inaugural Ballers, which is the story of the first U.S. women's Olympic basketball team that played
yeah,
in 76. So, it took 40 years after the men started in 36 for women's basketball to be introduced in the Olympics. And these are women some of the biggest names in the game, like Pat Summitt was a co-captain of that
Yeah.
team. Nancy Lieberman was a high schooler who made that team.
Yeah.
Ann Myers, the first woman to get a 4-year college basketball scholarship, was a star on that team. And Lucy Harris was a pioneering black player at Delta State in Mississippi. She
Yeah.
was the star of that team. And these women came up at a time where they were told this is pre-Title IX. Like a lot of their schools didn't even offer a girls basketball team, or their teachers and parents would say, like, you're a girl, like sports aren't for you. But they refused to listen, and they were able to play a game they loved. And so you can see a common thread between all of these books, whether it's about women who are told they can't play, a gay player who's told he can't play and is actually run out of Major League Baseball. Perry Wallace breaking a barrier where, people that look like him were told they couldn't play in the SEC. They all have a common thread. Like I said earlier, I feel like sports is a human thing, and like everybody should be able to compete and to play.
Yeah.
But that hasn't always been the case.
Yeah.
And so I enjoy writing those stories.
Yeah. No, they're great stories, and yeah, that's awesome. Now I can say I know where the high five came from. I know there's still the debate on who created the wave, in stadiums.
Right.
I've seen that
Yeah.
story, but had no idea that Glenn was credited with the high five. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, the women's Olympic team. I mean, even look how far women's basketball has
No
come in a
kidding.
great way. Like, it's funny, like, I have a Paige Becker's hoodie because I made
Oh,
a
do you?
bet with my wife that they would win the national title, and she was like, "Alright, if they win, I'll get you a Paige Becker's jersey." All the jerseys were sold
Isn't
out.
it cool? I think it's great that you do. And like when I was growing up, I'm older than you, but I'm sure when you were growing up too, like the idea that a man or a boy would wear women's
Yeah,
apparel, like it wouldn't happen. I was at Dick's Sporting Goods with my son the other day, and they had a display up at the front, and it had a Caitlin Clark jersey, an Angel Reese jersey, a Sabrina Ionescu jersey, and he was like looking through it and really interested in
yeah,
these jerseys. I remember we were at an Easter party a couple of years ago, and it was the LSU Iowa game, I think it was
yep,
during the
yep,
tournament, and all the kids, boys and girls, like stopped to watch that game, and
yep,
that wouldn't have happened when I was growing up. And it's pretty
yep,
cool to see how, for a younger generation, like they don't care. Like it's good sports. These are great players, and admire them whether they're men or women.
yeah. Yeah, and I was about to say, like, just you writing these stories and then being able to see the transition that's happened over time, um, I know that's gotta be like just so cool for you to experience and see because yeah, I mean we're seeing Tim McGraw wearing a Caitlin Clark jersey on stage, and then yeah, I'm over here like I'm all Paige Beckers. I'm like, give me the hoodie, give me the jersey, give me her slides. And it's cool because me and my guy sports friends, we're sitting here texting most nights like, are you watching this game? It's Liberty versus Aces. Like, did you see Paige? It's like we know the matchups, Angel versus Caitlin. Like we're following all this. And yeah, even 5, 10 years ago, with some of my friends, like they weren't interested. I feel like I was the one like, guys, if you're not watching the WNBA right now, you're missing out. Like these girls can play. And now everyone's getting on board with it. And like it's awesome to see. Yeah. I'm very proud. When I rock my Page hoodie. I'm like, yeah,
Yep.
I got the Becker's hoodie on.
That's funny. And working here at the athletic department at Vanderbilt, obviously, as we're taping this, it's a week before football season starts,
That's
and
right.
everyone's excited about the start of college football season. But I'm also now exposed. Like, we're adding women's volleyball this
That's
year.
right.
Vandy hasn't had it, and so our new team is starting. They start a day before football starts, and I'm just as excited about them and watching those matches as I am about football. And I don't know if you've been to a college volleyball game before, but in some parts of the country, Nebraska had 90,000 people for
Yep.
their women's game in their football stadium. It is a really exciting sport, and I'm hoping
Yep.
that people will be exposed to that and start coming to the matches because it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. No,
They
I
have
can.
players up to 10 and a half, 11 feet off the ground, like a foot over a rim,
Yeah.
in these volleyball matches here, and it's really something to see.
Yeah. No, and I can attest, I'm a big volleyball fan. My wife played in college. I think I shared with you when we met before. and she's excited about Vanderbilt having a volleyball team because now us being in Nashville, we can go watch matchups and we watch
Hmm.
all the big games during football season. It's like football's on Monday night, volleyball's on Tuesday night, Wednesday night, football back on Thursday. Like every night, it's either football or volleyball. And
That's
so
cool.
we were even talking about we were talking about some of the Texas volleyball players the other day, and I actually knew something that my wife didn't, and I felt pretty good about that. I was like, I know this sport better than you now, you know, because
That's
I'm paying
great.
attention. So, yeah, no, it's incredible. We're excited to see Vanderbilt in the SEC from a volleyball standpoint now as well. Actually, we were at Costco last week. We saw a couple of guys wearing Vanderbilt volleyball T-shirts. I don't know if they're a
Really?
part of the university or not, but we both were like, "Hey, they got Vanderbilt volleyball shirts on." Like about that time.
Yeah. Oh, that's pretty cool. Happy to
Yeah.
hear it.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. But Andrew, do you plan? Do you have any other stories kind of in your line of sight that you feel like you might write about? You know, like these others.
Yeah. So I can update you on two series that I have for young kids, and then another book I'm writing for kind of a crossover between adults and teens. So um, I have a nonfiction series for kids called Beyond the Game: Athletes Change the World.
Yep.
That would be for kids that are starting to read chapter books on their own. So if you have kids that are maybe first, second, third grade, um, and I wanted to highlight athletes that have done something to help other people outside of sports. And so talking about women's basketball, one of them is on Maya Moore,
Maya
a great
Moore. Yeah.
UConn player, Minnesota Lynx player, that quit at the height of her game when her godfather told her a story about a man who was in prison for a crime that he probably didn't commit. And Maya looked into it, used her platform, her money to investigate this case, and the man received a new trial and was freed from prison. And I thought that was pretty remarkable that she would give up this successful career to advocate for someone else. Second book in the series is on LeBron James. Um, and I know, like, from a basketball sense, there's LeBron lovers and LeBron haters, but I admire him as a player and off the court. Like, somebody that's been in the spotlight since he was in high school, that really hasn't made any significant mistakes. Like, it's
Yeah.
the kind of person that you can look up to, and I think that he's someone that's never forgotten where he came from. He tries to give back to the kids in Akron, starting a school there, providing services for families even outside of the school, and continuing to speak up on issues when he's called on. Third book in the series is on Pat Tillman, the NFL player who gave up his professional sports career to enlist in the Army after September 11th and tragically was killed in Afghanistan. And just to think about the courage and the selflessness that he had to make that decision. And he believed that this was a time that the country was calling on people, and that just because he played football, that didn't give him a pass, and it cost him his life. So I thought that was incredibly admirable. And then the fourth book in the series is on a Native American woman named Jordan Marie Brings Three White Horses Whetstone, who is a runner, professional runner, and she raises awareness of an issue that's really not discussed enough, of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
Mm.
And there's a real epidemic of unsolved missing persons cases, murders, domestic violence, and she wears a red handprint on her face when she competes in events like the Boston Marathon, which is the symbol for that cause. And it's a really striking symbol, and she's a great woman, and I loved writing that book about her. I have a new fiction series that starts next month in September for kids about the same age range, first, second, third grade. And these are just books for fun, and they're about 9-year-old kids that are trying out for sports teams for the first time. Um,
Okay.
they have parents that are at once supportive, but maybe a little over involved. They have a coach who's reliving his glory days from high school. I think that hopefully they're somewhat funny too.
Yeah.
First book in the series is flag football. They're trying out for the second book, which will come out about 6 months later, is on soccer. Third book is baseball. The fourth book, which I'm about to start writing, is on youth hockey. And then I'm
Okay.
hoping that we'll have basketball and volleyball and many
Yeah.
more in that series. It's called
Yeah.
Sports Zone, published by Scholastic. And then the next, like, bigger, substantial book I'm writing is on the first Special Olympics. which
Oh,
took place in Chicago at Soldier Field in 1968. And really, everybody knows the Special Olympics now, but just going back to the origins and like who had this idea and what did it represent for people with intellectual disabilities who were so mistreated. Like, we look at the Special Olympics now and you see like these warm smiles and hugs and like celebrating the athletes. But at the time, up until the 1960s, really, and Special Olympics had a big part in changing this. These were people that were shunned, hidden in closets or shut away in institutions and told, like that they were an embarrassment to society. Like, we don't want to see you. We don't want to like deal with you. And it was really horrific treatment. And so I'm like telling that story and how Special Olympics changed that perception. Um, Got a lot of work to do. I've done the research on the book, but I have a lot of writing yet to go.
yeah. No, that's good. That's going to be a good one. I know my wife, she's a former athlete, but she also taught adaptive PE for a long time. It's a special
Okay.
place in her heart, and she kind of introduced me to that space as well. Um, so we will definitely be looking forward to
Oh, that's
that book
great.
when you get that completed, as I know a lot of people will. And yeah, and a lot of the books for young kids, these are books I would have read for sure growing up, just seeing some of my favorite athletes and learning about their stories. So, anyone listening to the podcast who've got young kids, go get Andrew's books. And I'll include obviously on the podcast link, we'll have a link to your website, Andrew, so people can go make the purchase. But um man, thank you so much for taking the time to go through all this. I mean, these are such incredible stories about incredible people, and man, just thank you for writing them first off, because the stories need to be told. But thanks too for coming on the podcast and just telling us more about it. Because I think me personally, I have so much interest in your writing. I know other people will too, and so man, just thank you.
Oh, thank you, Chris. This means a lot, and I thank you for what you're doing. And encouraging men to read, right? And supporting authors that are writing books that men might be interested in reading. Like, it means a lot. There's a real gap there. Men aren't reading enough. Boys aren't reading enough. It's almost a joke. Like, every time I get invited to a book club to talk about my books, it's all women. Like, there's hardly. I haven't been invited to any book club that's all men. There was one time that the women let their husbands come, but they made them sit in the back of the room and they weren't allowed to talk. you know,
Yeah, what? That's not fair.
yeah.
We read
And
too.
that, yeah, I know. So,
Yeah,
I mean, I think the types of books you're highlighting are important books, interesting books, fun books to read. And, you know, uh, it's important that people are reading even more so in society where attention spans are dwindling, but also what people can learn from books is so important, and whether they're kids or adults.
yeah. Well, that's the goal. The goal is to make
Yep.
sure young adults know reading is cool. It's what you need to be doing. There's a lot of cool stories out there to learn about and read about, and man, hopefully it'll trigger that curiosity and interest and continue to read, because I've learned so much. I'm the perfect example. Grew up loving sports, learned to read, or didn't learn to enjoy reading at a later age. But man, I wish I'd have read some of this stuff earlier. And so that's
Hmm.
what we're trying to encourage. And so no, Andrew, thank you again. We'll man, look forward to hopefully talking with you again too when you get some of these other books out. We'll do
Yeah.
another session and talk about these in more detail. But man, thank you again for all you're doing and the stories you're writing about. And man, it's been great talking with you, Andrew.
You too, Chris. Keep up the great work. Yeah, I'm a Vandy fan, but I know you're a Razorback. So, woo pig. Good luck this
Yeah,
year.
there we go. We'll make sure to not post that too loud out there for everyone to see.
All right.
Thanks,
Take care.
Andrew.
All right.